morning, everyone, and welcome to another creative writing webinar series. My name is Carolyn Curry de Castillo, and I'm the host of Unison TV. And today we're back with our creative writers. We're here with Mary and David and Rob. And today's subject, we're going to be talking about memoir writing. And in light of Father's Day coming up this weekend, we have Rob Weaver here to tell us about a memoir that he wrote. 35 years ago, in remembrance of the birth of his son. Rob, want to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to write this memoir?
Thanks, Carolyn. I'm sort of being started to retire about 5 years ago. Actually, it's been a long, slow process, and I'm almost there. And one of the activities that I took on was I joined the Call Memoir Writing Group. I thought it was something I wanted to do to write some stories from my life. Part of my inspiration for doing that was my own father died fairly young, and left me with a lot of questions about his early life that I hadn't had a chance to ask him. So I've been writing stories for that group for the last few years now. And this is a story that I wrote about the birth of my first son, which was 35 years ago. And Rob, my contractions have started. I started to rouse from heavy sleep. They began a couple of hours ago and they're about 5 minutes apart. It was 5 a.m. on Christmas morning, 1990. Karen, ever thoughtful, had delayed waking me up, which I appreciated. It was to be my last good sleep for a long time. I emerged into consciousness and the adrenaline started to pump. It was 2 days past Karen's due date, so it wasn't really a surprise. For the previous couple of weeks, we'd been careful to go to bed in good time, knowing that labor would likely start in the early morning. Unfortunately, the night before, we'd been at my sister and brother-in-law's house playing games, followed by a midnight Christmas Eve service at a nearby church. We hadn't made it home until 1:30 a.m. No matter, neither of us were sleepy now. We had been told we should go to the hospital when the contractions were 5 minutes apart, so we might need to leave soon. I started worrying about whether our car, which was parked on the street and wasn't plugged in, would start. It was -20 with a wind chill of -25. So I went out to test it, but our faithful Volkswagen Rabbit started fine, and I was relieved. Karen called the hospital, but they told her to wait until the contractions got more intense. So we waited. In preparation for labor, we had rented a TENS machine, which Karen's doctor, Dr. J, I'll call her, had suggested to help with the labor pain. Karen was very committed to having natural childbirth without painkillers and with as few interventions as possible, and she had found a doctor with similar views. I didn't feel as strongly about things, but I was fine with whatever Karen wanted. And operating the TENS machine was something I could help out with. We got it out now, and Karen started using it whenever a contraction came. About 10 in the morning, we called Dr. J, who suggested we stay home for another hour or two. I used this time to make phone calls to tell our families the news and to cancel plans. We had planned to spend Christmas morning with my mother, my sister, and her husband, and my 1-year-old niece, and to spend Christmas evening with Karen's family, her parents, 3 brothers, some with partners, along with my mother. We finally went to the hospital around midday. The old Grace Maternity Hospital, which was conveniently just 5 minutes down 14th Street Hill from our Capitol Hill duplex. The nurse measured our dilation at a good 3 centimeters, so things were starting to progress, which was good to hear. We had heard stories about 72-hour labors, and we hoped we wouldn't have one of those. We were given a large birthing room. The hospital was quite quiet because it was Christmas, which was nice. Dr. J stopped in to see us, but then left to do rounds of the Peter Lockheed. As the contractions and the pain got more intense, I took charge of the TENS machine, but it didn't seem to do much. I remember one moment when Karen was on her side and I looked into her eyes and they seemed to glaze over, as if she was in a completely different world. She wasn't someone to cry out, but it made me think she must have been in intense pain. She spent a long time in the shower after that, and that seemed to help. The final stretch of the labor really got going around supper time. Thankfully, the doctor returned just in time. Through the afternoon, Karen had been getting help from a maternity nurse who was bossy but also exuded competence and years of experience. She was the opposite of Dr. J, who, while in her 40s, was in her first year of practicing medicine, and at times didn't seem very confident. It struck me that the nurse had been at hundreds, if not thousands, of births, while Dr. J had probably been at a few dozen. At one point, after the nurse had said to us, "This would be a big baby," Dr. J had said, "No, I think it'll be a nice 7-pound baby." I didn't know who to believe. With the top of the baby's head crowning, Karen was pushing with all her strength, but the baby wasn't moving. When Dr. J was out of the room, the nurse said to me, "She's going to need an episiotomy for this baby to be born." However, Dr. J wanted to be faithful to Karen's wishes for minimal intervention. So instead, she tried using a vacuum extractor, like a large suction cup that attaches to the top of the baby's head so she could pull on the baby as Karen was pushing. However, it failed. When she pulled hard on it, it popped off. We learned later this would cause a bump on the baby's head because the baby's bone was so soft, which I found worrying. Finally, she relented and did an episiotomy, and after more huge efforts on Karen's part, our baby was born soon, after 8:30 p.m. He was a chubby, beautiful baby boy whom we named Colin. He was 9 pounds 10 ounces. The nurse had been right. It's hard to recall all my feelings when Colin was born. I'm sure I felt excited about seeing him for the first time, and also relieved that the process was over and that he was healthy. But the main thing I remember after the birth is that I was worried about Karen. She bled a lot after the baby was born, and Dr. J was concerned. She thought it could have been cervical bleeding and had the impression it could be serious. But there was also tearing, which required stitches. Perhaps the episiotomy was too small. Dr. J called another doctor for a second opinion, but they didn't come to any conclusions about the source of the bleeding. They decided to put Karen on an IV, and she was told to stay in bed, and they would monitor it overnight. After a while, when things seemed more settled, I had the pleasant task of phoning Karen's parents' house, where I knew everyone was gathered for Christmas dinner, thinking about us. My mum was very relieved to hear from me and that everything was fine. It was clear she'd been very anxious. Much less emotion was expressed by Karen's parents, and my mum told me later she was amazed how Ida could have remained so calm while her daughter was in labor, whereas she was in turmoil and could barely eat any supper. But knowing the two families and the two mothers, it didn't surprise me. Karen was given a private room, and I slept over on a chair which folded out. Overnight, Karen's bleeding was light, and in the morning they decided it was mainly from the tearing, not from the cervix, which was a relief. The next day, however, concern was shifting to Colin, who hadn't really nursed yet. Karen was very committed to nursing him, which of course was a new skill for her, but she could not get him to suck more than a few sips. He was very sleepy. The nurses became increasingly concerned, and when his blood sugar started to drop, they started pressuring her to give him formula. It was stressful for Karen, who resisted. She had learned that it would be easier for both her and Colin if she breastfed him from the outset. At some point, however, he did start to nurse more and things improved somewhat. It seemed he was just taking his time to fully wake up. During all this time, I was experiencing a nasty migraine, probably brought on by lack of sleep, stress, and dehydration. This is before I started using any migraine medication, so there was no relief available. I tried to put it out of my mind as best I could and focus on Colin and Karen. On the second night, however, I decided to go home to get a better sleep to try to get rid of it. It may have helped a bit, but it was still there on the morning of the 27th when I returned to the hospital, and Karen was annoyed with me for not having been there when a nurse tried to convince her in the middle of the night that she should give him a bottle, and told her that Colin might never take to breastfeeding. At that point, I regretted leaving. They didn't want to discharge Karen until they were sure that Colin was feeding satisfactorily. By the third day, while Colin was still having difficulty latching on, they must have been satisfied, so we were able to go home on the morning of the 28th. After a brief warming period, The weather had turned very cold on the night of the 27th. I stayed at the hospital again and had to park on the street with no ability to plug the car in. So I got up every few hours to start the car so that I could be sure it would start the next morning. When we checked out mid-morning on the 28th, the temperature was minus 31 with a strong north wind, giving a wind chill of minus 48. Actually checked the weather records to get those numbers. So that was Colin's first experience of outside air. I sometimes wonder if that's why he's always liked winter. It was nice to be home again. Our sleep was interrupted, more Karen's than mine, but at least we were in our own beds. And we discovered our bathroom was perfectly suited for changing diapers. There was a long counter next to the bathroom sink, which was perfect, and there was an empty space under the counter, probably intended for a laundry hamper, that could hold two large diaper pails for the cloth diapers that we had decided to use. After a groggy first few days, Colin had woken up and kept us very busy. We developed a routine in which Karen would go to bed early to help her get some sleep, while I stayed up late with Colin and put him down about 12. And this is how we saw in the new year. Karen had gone to bed while I wished Colin a happy new year at midnight as I put him to bed. It had been quite a year. Our lives had changed irrevocably. First Colin, and then his sister a couple of years ago, which provided us with endless entertainment as we watched them grow and develop, and I developed a deep love for them. Of course, there were many new skills we learn as parents, and sometimes things were difficult. Karen and I didn't always agree on parenting. I also realized that time had been much scarcer as I wanted to both share in raising our children and support our family financially and pursue a meaningful career. So I decided I needed to be more disciplined about time and gave up things like reading books and watching TV. Overall, though, it was the beginning of the most meaningful and rewarding experience of my life. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Rob. That brings back so many memories, and I'm sure anyone that's had children can relate to a lot
Yeah.
of that. Yeah, I sometimes I think when I see new parents, I'm like, oh, you poor suckers. You don't know what you're getting yourself into. Oh my goodness, some of the best and worst of times, but I'm glad, having said that, I'm glad it's all over, all that stuff, and I've got older adults now. But thank you so much. It was wonderful. Um, what would you like to discuss about that? Do we want to break it apart and dissect it and examine it? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think we like to make some sort of comment on it. Um, I would have liked to have seen a stronger ending, a stronger wrap up. Uh, because when I write, I, I have an idea introduced in the first paragraph, and I always like to come back full circle to that idea and wrap it up at the end. And that was the only comment I had really, Rob, that I thought the ending could have been more powerful. What did you think, Mary?
I was thinking more about the beginning. Um, I thought the ending was fine. I agree. It doesn't go back to the beginning specifically, but I like the beginning because it really grabbed our attention. It's the I think it's the only bit of dialogue in the whole piece,
Yeah.
and it grabs our attention and it brings us right into the story. Obviously, we know exactly what's going to happen, but it's a almost like a wake up call. Oh, something's about to happen here. Let's follow and see. So it draws us into the story well. Um, I thought that the ending was well, it didn't talk about the birth experience as much. It looked into the future. So if you want your ending to reflect on the beginning, it doesn't do that. I agree, David. But it looks into something, what's next, what's coming now, almost. Like this changed our lives, and if you're going to continue with that particular bit of your memoir, then you expect the next bit's going to say how your lives changed, and talk about the children. But I thought the ending was That's fine.
Yeah.
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 You talk about the endings. As a former I guess current journalist, I used to be a television reporter for like 35 years, and things that I would get hung up on the most in my stories were the obviously the beginning, but the end. Sometimes I would be down to the wire with editing, going down to, and I'd still be poring over what am I going to do for this? I need to have that good, great closing line, the great bit. And it's a tough thing to come up with that because I don't want to say like this way, but profound or something that's going to just really hit with the audience, right? Like at the end, that closing line. Um, what are your thoughts on that? Like just having something that leaves the audience going, yeah, or am I dwelling too much on it?
Yeah. Well, I do try to put some thought into how to end the story for sure. And I think with our type of writing, it can be a challenge. I mean, sometimes it works to go back to the beginning um, and wrap it up in that way. But I think sometimes you want to look forward to the next. I mean, quite often I have to say some of my pieces are several, I write them in chunks. So I might write a three-part piece about some period of my life, perhaps. So I'll try to that will affect, then I'll try to almost leave a hook for to leave some suspense for the next part, right? Um, but it's yeah, I think we all have different ways of dealing with that.
Yeah, to be continued kind of element, right?
Exactly. And I'll
Yeah,
use the words to be continued and
yeah.
be clear. And then at the beginning of the next piece, I'll do a brief recap of what happened the previous time. So that kind of thing.
Mary raised an interesting point there when you said that the only part that there was dialogue, well, the beginning had dialogue and it didn't have so much at the end. Does it make more sense to have some dialogue at the end? Is that a good way to
No,
close?
I don't think I think if you're going to have dialogue, it doesn't matter where it is, particularly, but it's a nice way to start.
Mm.
Definitely, that's true. Um, I think I was going to say that most of us in our group, if we're writing memoir, we're not just writing, we may call it stories, but we're thinking of a progression, as Rob is.
Yeah.
David has already done that with the early part of his life long ago. I've done it more recently, so it does. It leads into the next thing. But at one point, if some of the participants have watched the previous broadcasts we've done in this little series, they will realize that Rob's writing is quite different from mine or David's or Christina, who was here before. And I see Rob's story as it's very detailed. It's almost like documenting. Whereas if you include a lot of dialogue, you don't remember the dialogue. And so you're actually saying what you think the words were. It's not so much document. And I think that's one reason Rob doesn't have so much dialogue, because he really sticks to the facts of what he remembered step by step. And whereas some people writing memoir will include a little bit more imagination of what this is, what I think I said, or this is what I think somebody said because this was the mood of the moment and this was the general trend. I don't know.
I
Do you
tend
agree,
to.
David? Yeah.
We all write differently. Rob writes very linearly, whereas I tend to write going round in circles, looping back to the past and up to the future and so on. And I digress quite a bit into peripheral matters, whereas Rob tends to, but that's his scientific background. He is a scientist after all. He's got this logical training, I think.
I find it.
Would you say that?
I'm sure it's true. Yeah, I found it really interesting in the group the diversity of the ways in which we write. Some people use a lot of dialogue. Some people never use dialogue, and some are in between. I occasionally like to use it, and I can see the value of using it. I think it takes practice to do that, and because in reality, as Mary says, we don't remember the actual conversation, so you have to but you have to come up with words that are very plausible too. And sometimes that doesn't work. You can come up with dialogue and it just it doesn't sound a little stilted or something. So so I tend to yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we all write with our own voice is what it comes down to. And I think um there's what 10 or 11 people in our group. I could look at a paragraph of anybody's writing and I would know within two sentences who wrote it just because of the style that they use, etc.
Thank goodness we're all different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, and
yes.
it's not it's just to me it's just different, and there's no
Mm.
right or wrong way. For someone to write in a very different style would probably be quite challenging and wouldn't work. So you can't we go with what works for us in general.
I have to say, what a gift it is to your son, Colin, though. How many people have a record of their birth like that? Very, very few.
Yeah.
And
So interesting for him to be able to have that own little thing about me, right? Like it's your own individual story. That would be so precious to anyone.
And I wrote another piece about my daughter who was born 2.5 years after that. Who was
Well, you had to, didn't you?
I
Yeah.
wrote first. And
Yeah.
But I think style comes from your personality and the way you express yourself and the way you look at life. But it also, I think, could come from your audience, who you're writing it for, and why are you writing it. Might also affect your style. And I think it does affect Rob's. He's writing for his kids and his grandkids so that they have a record of what happened before they were born or when they were young. And that ends up to more like a linear chronological documenting the past kind of style. One thing that Rob doesn't do so much. He says he's writing this as a father's story, and it's his story of how he experienced the birth of his child. He doesn't express very much about his feelings. He mentions it, but in a very kind of factual way. He doesn't write poetically. He writes, as David says, he's a scientist. Whereas some people are more poetic and bring more emotion into it, which is just different styles, and it's all valid. So I
I
don't.
guess I got the impression of how he was feeling just from him stating some of the facts, like when the conflict between the doctor who seemed to be a bit of a newbie and the kind of the been there, done that nurse who was like knew what was going down, and then a new dad going, what do I believe and who do I trust and that kind of thing. So I get the impression there was that, but yeah, I probably could have used for a little more. What was going on in your heart? What was going on in your mind at the time? And we can, guess from it, but yeah, Mary, maybe
I
that,
with some of that. I know I remember
You
feeling
did, yeah.
anxious about whether the car was going to start. That was one
yeah,
of the
that too. I felt the cold. I felt the
yeah.
cold throughout the story, definitely.
Um, yeah, no, but and that's something that I like I mean, I do like to try and recall emotions when I can. I think because that really enriches a story. Um, so um,
And you briefly touched on the worry about Karen, but I would have liked to gone a little bit more for that because I only know birth is through the experience of the woman, the person at the center of the attention. But I'd like to hear more. What's it like to be the guy on the outside that's kind of feeling, I don't know, helpless or that kind of thing, or
yeah,
worry
yeah,
or
for
yeah.
sure. And I remember that my worries were about Karen, not about the baby
Mm,
after the birth, because that's what they were supposed to focus in the room was, oh, is Karen gonna be okay? She's been bleeding a lot. What's that about? And so I definitely remember that. And part of the reason why I chose this story is because I remember I've also got an extended family that I send my stories to. One of my sisters is a loyal reader, and my daughter, they're the ones who most likely read my stories right now. And one of my sisters said, yeah, it's so unusual to read a birth story from a father's perspective. You know, she'd read a lot. She's in a writing group in Victoria and reads a lot of stories, and had never, you know, I've seen read lots of birth stories from a mother's point of view, but not one from a father's point of view. And so that, yeah, maybe this is an interesting one. So,
And you're a bit younger than me,
yeah.
but your generation is the first one where the father actually gets to participate in the birth. My husband couldn't get near me.
Right.
Nor
When my
me.
children were born,
I was told I had four
Yeah.
children, and on every one of them I was told, get lost, get out of the way, we'll
Yeah.
call you when it's over.
Yeah.
And I feel cheated about that, actually. I would have loved that experience because I've seen my son's reaction to being present at the birth of their children. And it appears to be such an emotional experience. They were all totally in tears. And I've missed that. And I think it's a bad thing too.
Maybe you should write about that. Your
Yeah.
father when you couldn't get near.
Yeah.
How cheated you must feel, right?
One thing that I've noticed as a group, there's about 20 years of range in our group.
Yes.
And there's in some of the stories that we write, in a way, document the social history of changes like that, right? I mean, you can see it in many areas of society, but that's one of them is, you know, and as we read these stories, we become aware as we talk about them, wow, you know, things changed during the decade or two here that we're talking about. So
it's interesting how your comment about documenting social progress. I think I'm the senior one in our group, and I'm working on one now on chamber pots. You know, you can take anything you like, and you go back in your memory, and you can weave an interesting story around it. So I've let the cat out of the bag. I've told you what my next story is going to be
for September. But I think this raises another interesting point, which I think is worth discussing, because memoir is sometimes referred to as creative nonfiction. And it's interesting to think about what creativity, or where can creativity find its place in writing a memoir. If you want to document what happened, then you're not creating a story in that sense. But there's lots of room for how you structure your story, like David does, becomes very creative and different because of the way it's structured. In other cases, it's imagining what people said. The dialogue allows for creativity. So it's a lot of people think of they say, oh, well, the minute you start talking about creativity, you're talking about fiction, you're not talking about nonfiction. But that's not really the case. There is a lot of room for creativity in how you approach the writing of memoir.
Well, just even if you were to go into more describing, I don't know, like how the cold felt, you know, like just something that could take us back there to use some, you know, more creative and descriptive feelings of. I like the thing about looking into Karen's eyes. That really stayed with me. They were glazed over. Like that raised a picture in my mind. But yeah, there's obviously many different ways we can go deeper into the description of what we visualize, what we remember from that time.
That reminds me of a phenomenon I've seen when people die. It seems like at the end they start to pass into are living in a different world, and they really don't want people around them. In fact, very often it's when the loved ones leave the bedside for 10 minutes that that's the moment they go. It's like you need quiet and solitude. And I wonder in this birthing process whether you don't actually pass into a sort of different world, a different headspace with no connection. I will never know because that's an experience no man can have, which is where the women have the advantage on us, though they may not feel it that
I'm
way.
not sure how much of an advantage that it is to give
But
birth.
men can never have that
Yeah.
maternal experience, which I imagine is extremely powerful for women.
That's funny you mentioned that because the one thing I remember about my first daughter's birth was, and I'd planned to do the same thing as Karen. I just wanted, completely medical free, da da da, and had an image of what I wanted the birth to be like. But the baby was coming out the wrong way. Her back was pressed against my back, and I forget the name for that type of labor, but it's excruciating back pain because it's pressing against your spine. And the feeling I remember to this day, and I remember journaling about it, was I felt like I was watching the process from above and feeling like my soul had just been drawn from my body and just watching this and going, hmm.
Uh,
Like, yeah, and that's it. Maybe
I've
that's
heard
that
them
moment where your
before.
eyes glaze over and go, I'm checked out, or it's preserving you, or whatever. I don't know. I don't know enough about human
Yeah.
psychology, but yeah, that's an interesting point.
So, and getting back to Mary's question about the creativity involved, yeah, so that to me it's so one of the things we could debate about is when we're writing memoir, is it just from our memories or should we consult other sources? For one of the things, like I kept a journal, and sometimes I look back at it and then I'll think, oh, wow, this is a little different from how I remember it in some ways, which I will incorporate. But other people would say memoir, would maybe just do the memoir straight from their memories. But then another question is, so sometimes I've written a story and then I've sent it to my older sister because she'll remember things about my early life from my parents that I didn't remember. And so then I might sometimes incorporate her ideas into mine. And sometimes I think, well, I think I like it my way. So it's um, so there's just so many different choices to make, as the point I'm making about as we write memoir, as what do we write, what do we write about? What sources do we use? How do we write about it? What perspective do we use? Dialogue? Do we not? Do we do it linearly? Do we use a flashback? Do we use a hook at the beginning and something to try to grab the attention, even if we need to flashback and tell the story afterwards? So, yeah, it's still a pretty creative process, even though I might be trying to tell the most valid story I can of that time. So it's very interesting process for me.
And I think being in a writing group really contributes a great deal to the process because you
How?
see how other people are writing and how they're putting their things together. And it gives you ideas, it gives you more flexibility, you see different ways of approaching things. And of course, you get feedback
Yeah.
as you're writing from the other members who say, no, well, I didn't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Or that didn't work. I didn't get what you're talking. I didn't get what you're saying. That doesn't match with that. You contradicted yourself. The feedback from a group is really very, very significant. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I get is I realize the people, that the group has heard the story in a certain way, and I realize, oh, I didn't emphasize this enough because
Yeah.
it's I've given you that impression, and that's true, but
Yeah.
it didn't, it's not the full impression that I really wanted to give.
Yeah.
So that's
Does your memoir look different than Rob than when you first wrote it? Are there different revisions after you had feedback?
I don't remember. This was after I'd incorporated some feedback from the group. And even going back and looking at it now, because I wrote this 4 years ago and I hadn't looked at it for about 4 years. And going back and looking at it now, I made some changes because I thought, oh yeah, I didn't talk about that. Or I didn't or when I read it actually my impression was, oh, wasn't clear enough how I felt about this. And
Mm.
so I tried to add some of that. Um, so yeah, I mean sometimes I get feedback that makes me change a story quite a bit, and sometimes less so. Sometimes um, I mean, we only have in our groups maybe typically 10 or 15 minutes to talk about a story, and um, depending on how the discussion goes, sometimes we can get carried away and we ended up, so not focusing so much on each story. So but sometimes, and then we'll often have a chance to get written feedback from people too. So if the process works well, it works well. We can get good constructive feedback.
yeah, and it depends what the members want to get from the group.
Yeah.
I've been in the group now for 9 years, and it's changed a lot. When I first joined the group, um, there was quite a bit of focus on commenting on the writing style. Um, Whereas now and that's what people wanted. Now it's evolved a bit more so that people want to share their experiences and talk about their experiences more than their actual writing. Although we do comment on writing as well, but not as much as we used to. So, some people come to the group for different reasons. Well, I joined the group because I knew I wanted to publish a memoir, and I really did want feedback because I had two audiences. I had an audience in Canada, and I had an audience where I was writing about in Zimbabwe. And I needed to know, I had just returned to Canada, I needed to know what Canadians, how they would react to what I was writing. And it was very valuable to get that feedback. But if you're writing for your children, it's something different. The kind of feedback you want might be different. Or you're just writing because you want to write. You feel like you want to sum up some things about your life. Then again, what you want to get back, what you want to get out of it may be different. What you want to get from the other group members. So if Unison is forming a group, um, the people who join it might want to think about why they're going to join the group, what they want to get out from, because then as they meet, they can discuss with each other. This is what I want to get from it.
Is that memoir, Rob, still a work in progress?
This particular piece,
Yeah.
ju- um,
Do you
no,
change it or
I'm
is it?
happy I'm happy with the way it is right now.
Mhm.
Um, what I plan to do is to print off all my little pieces and put them in a binder, and so they'll be around if one of my kids wants to read them. And as I look at each piece, I'll probably think, oh, I need to tweak that. I mean, I think some writers would say they're never really finished,
Mhm.
they're always revising, and I think that's true up to a point. But at this point, it's tweaking
Yeah.
more than anything.
Some of my pieces, when I go back, I think, okay, that's done. I've moved on. I want to write about other things now. So I don't want to go back and keep
Mhm.
Yeah,
tweaking
Yeah,
them.
yeah. It's
I don't do that anymore either because I'm just writing now for my family.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And in truth, I don't. Yeah,
yeah.
my priority is writing things that I haven't written. So it's not on editing things I've already written. So yeah.
Mm.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Well, it's a fine piece of work. However, the one thing I would like to hear more about is your feelings. If you just what exactly you recall feeling when you look into Karen's distant eyes, or the I guess the worry about the cold, or what you felt when you realized that you touched on it a bit, but the realizing that time is scarce. That stuck with me too,
Mhm.
to know, boy, this is going to be a life changer. Now, kind of the moment of where it really sit. I'd like to hear that from a dad's perspective of, whoa, there's no going back from this now, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
But one of the problems I found with that is I couldn't remember how I felt. Or
Mm.
I remember one of the group members asked me once, "What were you wearing?" Goodness me, do I know what I was wearing?
Yeah.
Or what were you thinking at that moment?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't remember. And there comes the question: am I going to invent something
Mm.
that was probably what happened, or am I going to say no? I don't know, so I leave it out.
Yeah.
It's a choice.
I suspect if it was profound enough, it'll
I
be
would
with you,
remember.
right? Yeah.
Exactly.
If it was a
Yeah.
really impactful,
Yeah.
Yeah.
emotional thing, I would
Yeah.
remember. But yeah, or if I wrote about it in my journal, I could go back
Right.
and maybe that would be the other story.
Yeah.
But the very fact of writing stimulates the memory, I find.
That's true.
Yeah.
As I'm writing, I start to go down rabbit holes and I remember stuff that I thought I'd forgotten. And I'm sure I'm remembering it and not inventing it.
Yeah.
Because it all ties together.
Yeah.
And you're remembering it more than, say, if you were to do like orally to speak to someone about this event that happened in your life, to actually be, I don't know if you still do pen to paper or on your laptop, that process brings back more
Very much
memories.
so. I can, if it's orally, it just doesn't work for me. I have to write. Actually, I feel ideas flow out of my finger into the pen and onto the paper. I've tried just going straight into dictating or into the computer, as everyone does these days. But there's still something about the speed of a pen moving across a piece of paper that unlocks memories in a way for me.
Really?
Yeah.
I find that what I do is I have a piece to write and I will think about it before I will have a fairly good idea of what I'm going to write before I start writing. I think about it. And as I think about it, I start remembering different things that I'd forgotten. I think, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I got to write about that. As I'm thinking. And not so much comes while I'm writing. So everybody has their own way. There's no right way, as David said.
Yeah. And for me, it has to, I find the writing process helpful, but not by handwriting. I do I have to use a keyboard. My relationship with my pen is not as friendly as yours is.
Well, I spent many years with having to write everything because that's the era I grew up in.
Yeah, we used to have to
Well,
write.
so did I, but yeah.
But in Rob's case, you didn't speak into your phone. You actually were um on your keyboard.
No. I use the keyboard. I type on the
Yeah.
keyboard. One of the members in our group does dictate. She always dictates.
Hmm.
That's Christina, actually. So
Does she?
yeah, she doesn't. She doesn't type.
Well,
Yeah.
what I do is I write by
Yeah.
hand and then I
Do you?
dictate. I read it into the computer when I've written it by hand.
Oh, I just type it on the computer.
Yeah.
What was your first line again in the memoir, Rob?
Um,
It was Karen
yeah, saying my contractions have started.
Mm. Yeah, that draws you in. Everyone
Yeah.
wants to know how that old story turns out. It can go in a million different directions.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're a woman and a mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have some, and I don't often come up with a good hook, but I knew there was a good one there. So
Yeah, that's what they call the hook.
Yeah,
Something
good
that
one.
grabs your
yeah,
attention.
and you've got some great ones, but
Yeah.
I mean, most of us don't read.
Yeah, David's very good at that.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was Colin's reaction
I
when
don't
he
know if he's
read
read
it?
it actually.
Sorry?
I don't know if he's read it actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, that's exciting
Um, I mean, I've sent it to
to
him,
know.
I'm sure, but
Yeah.
he's a new dad. He's busy.
Oh, how long ago was that?
So probably soon after I wrote this piece, I guess. Let's say I wrote this piece. Yeah, he's got a 4-year-old and a 3-month-old now. So
Oh my goodness, that would be the perfect time to read it when you've got a new baby to read
well, I
something like
will.
this.
Now that I printed it off, I'll drop it by just in case. You never know, we might get around to it.
I think that would be an amazing Father's Day gift.
Yeah, it would actually, wouldn't? That's a nice thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh. Any other tips you guys can give for someone that has an idea of a memoir they would like to write, but I find it's that first line, like, how do I start it?
Well, don't. I mean, don't have that idea. This is how I'm going to start it. Think about what you want to write and start writing. It doesn't
But
have to be the beginning. It could
mm,
be somewhere in the middle.
okay.
But just get writing.
And And so joining a group is great
Yeah,
because I think most of the people in the group would say they had the plan to start writing for a long time and weren't getting around to it and thought maybe if I join the group and am accountable to getting a piece out every 2 weeks, that would motivate them. And so that's what, that's why people come and
yeah.
join our group really to.
And what I found was that we always have a topic in our group. So for the next meeting, you're going to write about this topic. We agree on a topic. And what I used to do was I'd think of a part of my story that I wanted to tell that suited that topic, and then I'd write that bit. So I didn't write anything in order. I'd write it in separate bits. And then at the end, of course, I had to fill in all the gaps. But I think I'm going to start my memoir and now where am I going to start it and start from the beginning and go on. I'm not sure that that's the best way to approach it. It would work for some people probably, but it certainly didn't work for me. I didn't attempt
Yeah,
that.
the piece I'm contemplating writing right now is I get the subject, it comes to me, and then I've got disconnected pieces all over. For example, something that came to me is when I worked in the railway, they used to tell jokes of how when the Royal train parked on the siding for the night, a trusted railway worker with a silver bucket with a crest on it would put it under the outflow of the toilet of the carriage. And what he did with it in the morning, I have no idea. But those were the sorts of stories that come back. And another one that comes to my head is Napoleon's brother in the Peninsular War fought a battle which they lost, and the British forces captured his private carriage. And in it was a silver chamber pot. And for the next 200 years, on the anniversary of that battle, the regiment has drunk champagne from that chamber pot, and they're still doing it today. So
Delicious.
there's thing, my head's full of useless bits of information, but when I think of a subject, I sort of grab them like picking cherries off a tree. I don't know how I'm going to put them together. I just collect them and then I work on that.
So if somebody thinks they're going to write a full memoir most of their life, um, I would say start with the bit that you think's most interesting. That's going to grab people's attention, depending on who you're writing it for,
Mhm.
who's the audience. And then get started, because once you get started, it gets easier. And and Rob says, if you join a group, that is really a good motivation, and it's a good thing to do with other people.
We've It gets to be a bit addictive, and it does for me. Now we've broken for the summer, but I feel the need to write. That's why I'm starting on something new. I feel I have to do it somehow.
And David's style, because he knows a lot of history and he loves history and he knows a lot of and he's a bit of a philosopher as well, I would say. He in his personal stories, he somehow manages to tie up with bits of history, which is
Like Napoleon's chamber pots. I didn't know.
exactly, and
Who knew?
he'll attach that somehow to his own life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I am anxiously looking forward to that one.
um, which brings me to the point you didn't have anyone bold enough to contribute from the audience today, which is a pity because we like to get feedback. I know we talk a lot, but
Yeah. Is anyone out there? I know we have listeners out there. Does anyone like to talk about any questions they have for the crowd and any or panelists? And if they have any questions about getting started on doing memoirs, here's your chance. But raise your hand. We have some experienced folks here. I do like Mary, your advice about starting with just something interesting. And I think from there, things will just cascade out and the story will just kind of fall out on its own and into some ways if you go start with that interesting point.
It might not be that easy, but yes, get you going.
Yeah.
I often use outlines actually too.
Um,
Depending on what I'm writing about, I'll kind of outline the story out, kind of an idea of, I'm going to have a paragraph on this and this. And then when I write, I might change that. But I do like to have some structure in my writing,
yeah.
which helps make it easier to write and easier to read, probably. So,
Sounds like the scientist's
yep,
approach, right?
Yes.
exactly.
I find as a former television journalist, the way I started my story was always to go through, I would go through all the video that my photographer shot and find the best shot, the one that was the most interesting. And that's was my starting point in the story, is start with the best visual and then write to that. And so I guess to apply that in this case, you could go to a photograph
Yeah,
perhaps of something that you want to write about and study that photograph and look at the, I don't know, the old vehicle in there or the granary or I'm just thinking back to a shot of my great uncle's farm. The little details in it, the clothing that they were wearing, the pleated pants or right from that black and white photo would be a good starting point perhaps.
Yeah. I usually try to go through my albums when I write a story and see if I've got
Mm,
capture and then on that particular time or so. Yeah, I had one. Um, I didn't have a, yeah, when my daughter was born, she was in the ICU for a while, so I did have one photo of her in the ICU and us both there. So it's nice. It was, nice to have those photos, and I can just incorporate them into the story. So when I can, so
Often we don't pay enough attention to photographs because it's in the details, the stuff on the side, not necessarily the person, but
mhm.
how the room's furnished or some little thing there that brings you into the moment when the photograph was taken.
yeah,
Otherwise,
Totally.
it's just a picture, of a person.
yeah,
But there's
yeah,
clues everywhere if you know how to look for them.
yeah,
But you'd be skilled at that as a
yeah.
television
Yeah.
reporter.
And I just remembered actually in this one, yeah, I did have a photo of after we brought Colin home. It must have been early January, and I had him on my shoulder in the way that I remembered I would have had him at midnight on the 31st. When I would have, exactly, it was probably not that late, but it was exactly what I would have been doing with him at that time. So, and he was about, yeah, little guy.
I would love to hear the ICU story because that's something not everyone has um, experience with. So
Yeah,
please feel free to bring back that one because I'm sure that brings a whole new set of emotions
yeah, exactly.
to be
Yeah.
dealing with that.
Yeah. So yeah, and she was born 7 weeks early, so that was why. So
Mm.
yeah, yeah, I can. That was another one that I picked out for as a possibility for today. So um,
So, Carolyn, we are breaking for the summer now, but I've been talking to Unison about forming a writing group in the fall, but it would be an in-person sort of group where, or it could be a hybrid type of meeting. And there was going to be some question about whether there would be enough people who wanted to join such a writing group at Unison for the fall. Have you heard anything about that? Or is that
I
a
have not heard that, but I
oh,
love the
that's a
idea of
different
it.
department then? Uh, but I just wanted to let your
Mhm.
viewers know that in the fall there are plans to create a unison writing group, uh, primarily in person, but also hybrid. But it would be the sort of one where you turn up and you have to write something, maybe once a month. uh, and then you talk about it. So I just wanted to let your viewers know that that was in the background.
I love it. I'll be the first to sign up for that.
And I think
I,
the intention was that it would be a memoir writing group.
Primarily a
okay.
memoir writing group because that's
Yeah.
what people were most interested in, or it was thought they would. Actually, I find nonfiction, fiction very much more difficult.
Oh, I think so.
Mm. We just have a comment here from Rhonda. I love the idea of a detailed record of your family's birth experience. I found myself wishing my husband had done something similar. As you might says, I was too in the experience to remember specific details. I
Mm.
think a lot of us can relate to that as well. But yeah, good on you, Rob, for writing that down. That is an incredible gift.
Mm.
Yeah. And you, Carolyn, and when you were a mother, were
Mhm.
you too much in the experience to remember much
I
about?
did write down that one feeling I told you about, like my soul observing
Oh, yes.
what was going on down there. I wrote it for my best friend because it's had to stay that I don't know, can't remember when I wrote it to her, but I still put pen to paper and wrote to her about this experience. And the other thing I wrote down, being in the was the difficulty with nursing too. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I would rather go through labor than try to figure out this nursing stuff because it was so awful and so painful." But I do remember that as being. I'm painting this picture of children being an awful thing, but yes, those are the two things that I do remember. But yeah, I would have loved it if my husband would have written something down. I'll see if I can prompt him too, right? Because it's yeah, the experience from the male perspective is so valuable
Yeah.
because we sometimes it's ignored and it's they're they're a valuable obviously a very valuable piece of the puzzle. What was it that prompted you to write it, Rob?
Oof. Yeah, I don't know. Just when I was, yeah, it just seemed like an important moment in my life that I wanted to write about. It was one of those watershed experiences, right? It's not like, as we talked about, life is never the same again. And I guess that was the main thing. So yeah.
Well, and it definitely chronicles what an essential role fathers play in the lives of their children at birth and 35 years later. So, if there aren't any other questions from the crowd, I'd like to just say thank you so much for this for you, Rob, for sharing that, and then for the education on how to go about writing a memoir. And I look forward to engaging with you guys again next month and learning more about where Napoleon went pee and who's fortunate enough to drink out of the remnants of